Okay, we have ionic compounds and metals. And now check out a couple other mini lessons I've done on ionic compounds and metals, and it kind of goes into a little bit more detail. I'll give you a brief overview of this tutorial. As always, I typically will not answer the questions. I'll have you do that stuff on your own and the videos and stuff. And I think that's about it. So let's get started on ionic compounds. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so let's just review this question though. Okay, so sodium will lose. So this is just examples of like how they gain or lose electrons. Sodium loses 1, calcium would lose 2 electrons, phosphorus gains 3, aluminum loses 3, fluorine gains 1, and sulfur gains 2 electrons. Pretty interesting concept one. That means like when two elements are matching up together or forming a compound, how many electrons do they lose in like their outer shell? Do they gain? How do they do it? So again, the video, I'll skip that, have you do that on your own. Ionic bonding. Okay, so let's just briefly read the definitions. Metal, a substance that conducts heat and electricity. So think of it, it tends to be shiny and used in many industries. So metal tends to be shiny. Think of like gray shiny object, something like that. Conducts heat and electricity. They're good conductors too. Non-metals are not poor conductors. So it's solid in state, it's brittle, dull, poor conductor of heat and electricity. That's the main difference between the two as well. Compound, a substance made up of 2 or more chemical elements that are chemically bonded together. So ionic bond, the force of attraction between ions that are near each other and have opposite charges. So there's 2 different charges, positive or negative charge. Properties, special characteristic or quality that something possesses. Okay, ionic bonding. So we have these 2 examples of ionic bonding. What takes place? What is an ion? Cation and anion. So here's 2 examples, positive charge and negative charge. What actually happens? What's an ion? An atom or molecule that has a positive or negative electric charge. Simple. And as you can see, here's what we have going on. Crystal lattice is a 3-dimensional arrangement of atoms, ions, or molecules that has a regular repeating structure. Okay, so that's basically just a structure that is kind of repeats itself. It kind of looks the same as you're going along on the structure. So it has like the same like line type or circle type pattern, something like that. Okay, so I will read this question. What happens when ionic bonds are formed? Metal atoms lose electrons, non-metal atoms gain electrons. That is the main thing that occurs when ionic bonds are formed. So like an ionic compound, ionic bond, ions, all that. Okay, so yeah, the metals will lose electrons and non-metals gain them. So the explanation, when an ionic bond is formed between 2 atoms, one of the 2 atoms loses electrons and the other atom gains them. So that is just the main difference. It's just restating that for you. The atom that loses the electrons is metal. The atom that gains is a non-metal. Pretty interesting. Okay, valence electrons, that would be, so this is the main definition here, the main thing that you'll take out of this. The valence electrons are the electrons in the outermost shell. Let's read this. You have an electron in the outermost energy shell of an atom. So when you see valence electrons, think outermost shell. Ion charges, this on the periodic table shows the different charges. So these are plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, and then these are negative charges. So we have 3 positive charges and then 3 negative charges, 1 neutral. All right, I'll have you do this on your own. Ionic compounds, let's go ahead and read this. So what are ionic compounds? Well, compound that consists of positive and negative ions. So it has both. Here's some examples. And this card, these are just showing some different examples, the ion names. Again, formulas for ionic compounds. This shows some more examples. Here's the name, here's the formula, what it looks like, all that stuff. All right, video, like I said, I'll have you do that on your own. Go. I'll skip the questions too. And another video. Oh my goodness. Okay, crisscross method. Here's how you would determine like the formula for it and the charge. So here's how you determine positive or negative and how you crisscross it with each other. You go by greatest common factor. So it will give you this little bit of a review in here on how to calculate greatest common factor and all that stuff. I also have a lot of these in mini lessons on my YouTube channel. If this is too much to read, I just recommend that you go back to the mini lesson and it breaks it down pretty easily for you. Okay, so now we have this one. It's just showing how the charges are broken down like this and what goes on. Remember, chemistry and algebra kind of combine with each other. Kind of interesting. Periodic table, we'll do an example. And questions, I'll have you do this on your own. Ionic compounds, just kind of goes over ionic compounds. They're pretty interesting when you think about it. Just some more ionic compounds here. And, okay. Metallic bonding. All right, so let's just talk about this. It shows the process of how things are bonded together. Here's the positive charges, negative charges, okay? And let's see. Aluminum metal is composed of only aluminum atoms. Pretty interesting because it only contains one element. So it is not a compound because it only contains one element. So it's just aluminum. So when you think of aluminum, think it's just the element aluminum all together. Pretty interesting. Okay, this shows another example with electrons, positive and negative charge. All right, I'll read this one. The process of ionic bonding is not the same as the process of metallic bonding. Which of the following statements is true? Well, in metallic bonding, valence electrons can move freely between atoms. So that is just the main difference with metallic bonding. They move freely. Properties of metals. So when you think of metals, what do we think? They're good conductors of heat and electricity. What other properties can you think of when you think of metals? Think about that. Okay, we'll read these. Ionic compounds are made of positive and negative ions. They're brittle and they break into pieces when force is applied. Metallic compounds can be hammered into different shapes. So like aluminum, we can change the shape of it. Think of like aluminum foil, maybe in your kitchen. They conduct electricity in a solid state. So they're both good conductors of electricity. Now both, let's read both. So both ionic and metallic compounds. They're held together by attraction between opposite charges and they have high boiling points. Pretty interesting. Careers in science, if you're interested in science careers, this gives a couple examples of what these like careers in chemistry, pretty much like what you would do. And questions, we'll skip this. Hopefully they give you a little bit better understanding. And if it's a little bit confusing, go back to my little mini lesson on ionic compounds and it should give you a little bit more of like a breakdown of everything.